of invading Germans and intimidating Russians, of ghettos and camps, and gunshots and house arrest,
of top bunks and cold nights, of rain and barracks and dreams of walking in the streets, and trunks and guns and worn-out clothes, and tears in their eyes, of shaved heads in hospitals,
and full of marriage and children, of nachas and pride, of freedom and faith and family.
This is the 4th year that ASHAR's 8th grade is participating in the Names Not Numbers Holocaust Oral History Film Documentary Project.
Oh, Hitler. We didn't have to hear about him, we felt him.
Today was the first time I got to speak to a Holocaust survivor.
There was graffiti on the streets next to the Jews, dirty Jews. You knew you were not liked.
I felt like I'm so lucky that I didn't have to go through this and that my life compared to theirs is like easy.
Very little food and anything like that. Almost practically nothing. Honestly, I don't remember how we could have survived.
A life lesson that we should learn from this, we shouldn't take anything for granted because they had nothing and we have a lot and we don't think about that.
It just rained all the time. It was hard. Mud, and we had no shoes. Mud, rain, it was horrible.
And you could see the pain whenever they talked about anything from their past.
My father was taken and he benched me before he left.
I thought it was amazing that we were able to interview these people and that they were willing to tell us their stories.
The most important thing was faith. A person had to have faith and hope. If you didn't have that, you went very fast.
After learning about the Holocaust and seeing how many Jews there are now, I could see that Hashem kept his promise and kept his promise that the Jews will be like the stars on the sand.
We learned about the horrific experiences they encountered, and we learned about their strength, how they survived, and even how they thrived. A collaboration between teacher and student, ASHAR students and Holocaust survivors, a true fusion of the generations.
When we look back and try to comprehend or even remember what happened at this point over 70 years ago, World War II, the Holocaust, Baruch Hashem, thank God 100 times over and then another 100 times, that it is extremely difficult for the present generation to relate to the atrocities and the tragedies of so many decades ago. And now it's your turn. It's your turn not just to appreciate a phenomenal and exciting learning experience, but to be that next link in a living oral tradition. Right
after World War II, many of the Nazis were captured and they were put to trial, the Nuremberg trials. There are a lot of Nazis that were not captured, were not put to trial. They fled to different places, changed their identity, and started a whole new life. One of them was Adolf Eichmann. And in 1960, the Israelis kidnapped Adolf Eichmann and brought him to trial in Israel for the horrific things that had done to the Jewish people in the Holocaust. The prosecutor was Gideon Hausner, and he said that he was going to bring 112 survivors to tell their stories. So this is the first time publicly they are telling their story, and even more important, the world is listening to them. So now you are at the tail end of this generation that can still sha'al avicha, to ask your forefathers, to hear their story, to ask the questions you want, because you're interviewing them. And you will also zachor, you're making a documentary.
In this project, we are going to be interviewing Holocaust survivors. It's called Names Not Numbers because they were not identified by their names, they were identified by their numbers.
In this project, people could see that these people can't make such a descriptive lie. These stories have to be real, and that they're not just stories that they're making up, but it really happened. The Holocaust really did happen.
Journalism is a very important tool. It's one of the ways we balance power. It's one of the ways the public is informed. When you make your movie, you are informing the public. You need to stick to the facts. You have to ask ethical questions. You have to make sure you know what you're talking about.
To be a reporter, it's like important for Jewish to protect us. Why so?
They're the ones who keep you informed. You know, when you pick up your local newspaper, you see, somebody's fighting, you want to put up an Eruv and they're not going to let you put up an Eruv. You need to know the government doesn't want you to put up an Eruv. You have to act accordingly, right?
Today we had an interviewing technique session to how to interview survivors.
In preparing for the interview, we did research on his life before, during, and after the war.
I am very nervous for my interview because I don't want to mess up. And because I feel like their story should be perfect and nothing should go wrong because they deserve it.
On the day of my interview, I'd like to ask them how they got through the Holocaust because it's such a hard time and I don't know how I would.
You're very fortunate to be participating in this program because you're really the last generation that's going to have an opportunity to get to know Holocaust survivors. You're 8th graders, okay? That means that you are learning how to observe artifacts and images and interpret them, right? Just as you would interpret a text, so too you would look at a photograph or some sort of physical artifact and look at it and try to figure out what kind of story it tells. What's going on in this picture here?
The men aren't wearing any yarmulkes.
The men are, okay.
I mean, maybe in Germany there's another type to wear.
It looks like it's in an abandoned house or some sort.
Okay, why do you say it's an abandoned house?
Well, the windows are broken down.
Okay.
When I went to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, that was the first time I went there. When I saw all the toys and little things that the parents sent the kids, I found that very fascinating.
It is important to come to the museum because then you would be living the full experience of seeing all the things and being a part with other people, looking at it and seeing everyone's opinions.
The picture that I saw of the Jewish bodies getting shot and put into the pits shocked me, and it shouldn't be happening.
At the museum, Dr. Dansky showed us an anti-Semitic game from the war, and it was really disturbing to see how much they hated us.
Seeing the wall of all the kids and seeing their names and being able to see how young some kids were during the Holocaust makes me appreciate my life because I have a younger brother, and imagining him as being one of those kids is very sad to imagine.
On the day of the interview, you're going to come in and you're going to see there's going to be 2 cameras set up. Because this is an interview and it's like real life situations, right? So say for example, you're talking to a survivor who's 95, and they jumped off a train going to Auschwitz and they lost their family. It's an emotional thing, and they start crying. But what if you're busy and then they finish crying, right? So you're oh, sorry, can you just tell the story again and cry again? Can't do it. Once it's done, right? So the reason that I have the 2 cameras is so that you have one that's going to stay here the whole time and one that's going to be here the whole time. So that I'm never, in the editing, we're never in a situation where it's oh, we got to get this, but we can't use it because it's all shaky and out of focus.
Today with Names Not Numbers, we had the filming technique session. I learned how to use a camera.
I learned to frame a survivor using the rule of thirds. The lessons I learned from Names Not Numbers I could use the rest of my life.
enkele steht, a jedem weint.
It was very interesting getting to use the actual equipment and hearing her story. And I would never imagine what it's like to go through something that she had to go through.
It's not my first time seeing a Holocaust survivor, but it's my first time understanding how they felt.
He wasn't scared to talk about the stuff he'd been through, and most people I pictured or thought of would be like in shock and would be scared to talk.
In order to prepare for the interview, we wrote questions about before the war, during the war, and after the war.
In Israel, I had a neighbor that was a Holocaust survivor. I never really got to ask her too many questions. And now today with Names Not Numbers, I got to really learn what a Holocaust survivor really went through.
I wasn't really that nervous today because it's just like having a conversation with someone. You're just asking her about her life.
I was born in Hamburg, Germany. My birthday is November 14, 1932. My family was my parents, my father, mother, my two sisters, and my grandmother who lived with us in Germany. My father was in America we would call it a factory rep for leather goods company. Shabbos was a beautiful experience. My father went to shul, and I went with him sometimes too. We sang Zmiros, and we had a full meal, and it was just a very pleasant experience. I started school in the Talmud Torah, and that school was next to the big shul, which was destroyed during Kristallnacht.
I was born in 1931 in the place called Ansbach, a small town close to Nuremberg, in 1933. When the Nazis came to power, that was the headquarters. My father was a Rov. He was busy giving shiurim, being involved in the shul, and doing hashgochas. which means that so occasionally he had to travel, elsewhere. In those days, women did not work, which means my mother was home the whole time, taking care of us, and we did have a maid. As far as we were concerned as children, house, school, lots of homework. French are very academically advanced. And now we were out of the school on Shabbos, when there was school. So they had made arrangements with another kid who lived close by, a kosher kid who would bring us the homework on Sunday so we wouldn't fall behind. I would say a very happy childhood.
I was born in December 27, 1937, in Hilversum, Holland, in the Netherlands. Family members were my mother, my father, my brother, and myself. That was the immediate family in Holland. My mother and my father were hardworking religious people. They were very religious people. My father was a baker, and they both owned a bakery. And my mother worked in the store, and my father baked in another facility. My brother used to help in the bakery to help his father, he was very, very close to his father. And my brother and my father went to shul, and my grandfather every Shabbos. Life in Holland, it was a nice life. We had a very easy life. I was young, I was 5 years old, what I remember of Holland. My birthday, my mother always made a very, very big deal of my birthday. A lot of gifts, it was always a big birthdays. Even with my children and my grandchildren, I always make a big commotion about birthday. We were not aware of any anti-Semitism in Holland, no.
My name is Sophie Berkowitz. I was born in Romania, in the city of Chernovitz. In the house it was Yiddish and German. Out of the house was only German. Well, I spoke Romanian, I spoke German, I spoke Russian, I spoke Ukrainian. We played outdoors a lot. Shabbos, went to shul, we had Shabbos meals. The challah my aunt was making. Pesach, at my grandfather's house, we had a lot of fun. I didn't get the afikoman, my cousin got it. My grandfather was a very, very fine gentleman and very charitable and loving. I can't say much more than I know he was a perfect person. My father was in the United States through the whole time. My father left America to visit his parents, and he met my mother. And then they got married, and my father went back to the United States to establish his business. My father was in the upholstery business. And we remained waiting for him to come and pick us up. But the war beat us to it.
I was born in Romania. Well, I did go to Haider, what you call it, a yeshiva. I started at 5 o'clock in the morning. And then when I went to Dublin, from there I had to go to school, regular school. Then I went to Haider again. We finished about 8 o'clock at night. Up there we really learned a lot. Well, we spoke only Jewish at home. We only spoke only Jewish, we didn't speak any other language, except when I went to school. But otherwise, it's only Jewish. There was no anti-Semitism at that time. Like my father had a big brew factory, okay? We also had, on the side, we had also a grocery store. So that's all I remember. I mean, I only went to Haider, to school. That's all. I was a kid,
My name is Moshe Avital. I was born on July 18, 1928. I grew up in a town called Bilka in Czechoslovakia. Bilka has a population of 10,000 altogether. 2,000 of them were non-Jews. We were a large family. We were 11 children. I was the youngest. Until this day, I am thankful to them because everyone wanted to teach me something since I was the youngest. And I benefited a great deal from that. We were all very much devoted one to another. And it was a very happy family. My father was the shochet and the chazan of the town. My mother was a housewife, a wonderful housewife.
As time was growing on, anti-Semitism was growing in Germany. We could not play on the street anymore because the Goyish youth would run after us and they would taunt us and would call us dirty names, and it was just not very safe to play on the street.
The Nazis' headquarters was in Nuremberg. Came to power and they right away made all the Jews feel, we don't want you. My grandfather was the president of the big shul in Nuremberg. Within a couple of years of them coming to power, they called in my grandfather and they told him, you have to put our flag onto the Nazis' flag, onto the shul. Within days, they called him back to headquarters and they said, how dare you defile our flag and put it on your shul, take it off. And they kicked him down a flight of stairs. We left Germany in 1937, which was 2 years before the beginning of the war.
I remember from 1942 on, which I was 5 at that time when the Germans were there. I mean, the Germans, they invaded Holland, where once Germans invaded Holland, we had to wear the star, the Jewish star, yes. We felt it. I knew the Germans hated us, and I knew, you know, we were in danger. I knew that as a young child.
What happened was there's a lot of German guys that went to the German army, you know. But before they went to the German army, they came into the synagogue and they spread the Sefer Torah out on the floor and they did all kinds of crazy things on the Sefer Torah. That's because the police, of course, know about it. But then when the Gabba came in the morning, they talked about the shul, and all those things, you know. What happened after the Torah? I don't know. I don't remember. I was still like a kid.
Oh, Hitler. We didn't have to hear about him, we felt him.
As soon as the Hungarians occupied our town, they declared all kinds of racial laws. They forbid for Jews to be bankers, lawyers, be professors, and so on. And also they declared a curfew for the Jews, that we were not allowed to go out of the house from dusk to dawn. Right after that, they conscripted all the men from age 18 till 50 to what they called Munkotabor. That was the forced labor battalions. 2 of my brothers, who were the older ones, were also sent to these camps, and they both perished there.
We heard a lot of noise on the street, but we did not go out to the street. We knew things that were going on were not good. In the morning, my father was ready to go to shul, and the phone rang, and somebody called. He said they're destroying our shul. When he came to the shul, he saw some Nazis or some youth jumping out of the windows. They had literally destroyed the shul. They took the Sefer Torahs, they threw them all over, they tore them up, they took the tefillin from people and threw them all over the place. My father, plus some other Jews, they went and they took the Sforim, that were thrown out, and they picked them up and they put them into a cellar in a nearby house. The night after Kristallnacht, they arrested all the Jewish men and they sent them to a concentration camp. Concentration camp was Sachsenhausen. He came into the bedroom yet at night and he benched me before he left. He himself didn't know where he was going and if he will ever come back. So it was certainly very emotional. About 2 months afterwards, they were released. My father came back. He was a half a man from the time he left. My grandfather, Oliver Sholem, the one I was named after, Yoel, was a Talmid Chacham. And he was the president of the shul. There was an incident with a shochet in Hamburg who did something that he shouldn't be doing. And my grandfather felt that his aveira, whatever he did, was not the most terrible thing. When he had to go to America, my father gave him some money, and he also made him a Seistrim L'Sholem party. And a man came to America, came to Crown Heights, and he established himself. He had a shul. Meantime, my grandfather had died, and my mother married my father. My aunt, her sister, married a fellow by the name of Adler, and they lived in Vienna, Austria. In Austria, the situation for Jews was worse than by us in Germany. They were desperate to go to America. Then she remembered this shochet who had come to America that my grandfather had helped. And he wrote back, since your father, my grandfather, was so good to me during my Eis Tzara, I must help you. And he got one of his balabatim of the shul to send an affidavit for the Adler family. So they came here, I think in 1938, 1939, they came to America, and immediately they started to try to get papers for our family. And that's how we arrived in America in 1941, which was almost the last minute before things were real bad.
We left Germany for France was because my father had been offered to become a rabbi in the shul in Paris, and he had been born in France. France was his, what you would say, Mamelotion, that's the language he was the most familiar with. See, the Germans invaded France, and then step by step, they took over France. Since you always tried to stay ahead of them, it was just that constant being on the move from one place to another to make sure that they wouldn't catch up with us. When we knew they were going to come close to where we were, we would pack up and move to the next city. It happened 3 times. In Albi, you were for not just a number of days in the old French castle. And then you went to another place called Toulouse. Toulouse had a Jewish community, and we stayed there for a year. We had to move on, and we went to a place called Nice, where we stayed for 3 years. My father made contact with the underground, and they arranged for us to go into Switzerland. But we could not, they have identification paper. Identification paper is like a passport. It says your name and whatever. Our name was Monk, and these people told my father, you cannot have Monk on the identification paper because it's not a French name. We're going to change your name to Martin. Martin in French. And the first thing you must do is shave your beard. You cannot look Jewish. The Germans can be anywhere and they might arrest you. So my father shaved his beard. They gave us identification paper, and they made arrangements with my father how to take us to Switzerland. They would give us instruction. The guide informed my father that we cannot go any further because the borders in Switzerland are being patrolled by German Nazis with dogs. So we get off the train, stop in a place called Aix-les-Bains. Up the street, there's a hotel. I remember the name, Hotel de la Gare, which means the hotel of the train station. It also happens to be the Nazis' headquarters. And he said, well, it makes sense. No one is going to suspect Jews to take a room in the Germans' headquarters. There's a knock on the door, there's a German officer. And he looks us over and he says, I'm sorry, wrong room. And the guide tells us, okay, we are very close to Switzerland. We're going to walk single file, one behind the other, and absolutely no noise, none. So we walk through the field, it's getting dark, and we come to the border. The border that separates France from Switzerland is barbed wire. So these fellows have a special tool, cut the wires, and push us one behind, one after another, underneath the wire. This was Erev Rosh Hashanah, 1943. We crossed the brook, which is very shallow at the time, go on the other side, and now we are safe. And we stayed in Switzerland until the end of the war.
They had a very good friend, Stryland was his name. They weren't Jewish, and he knew exactly where we were living and where we are and what we were doing, and he ratted us out. They got paid for every Jew that was brought in. We had to leave our house, wherever we lived, we had to leave our belongings, and we had to go to a ghetto in Amsterdam. We were very scared. Soon after it started, and they picked up my father, and they took him to a jail. My father was never let go. We survived in that ghetto. We had no schedule, we had no life. We just stayed in the apartment that we were in. There was no life. The Germans came to our door and knocked on our door in the middle of the night and told us to get out, to come. A lot of Jews were marching to this auditorium in Amsterdam in the middle of the night. And we had no choice. They were surrounding us with guns, with machine guns and dogs. That's where we ended up at first. And then from there, they herded us to camp, to Westerbork, which is in Holland. My mother and my brother and myself, we slept on the top part of the bunk bed, and other people slept at the bottom part of the bunk bed. I remember I once got very sick, and I must have had a very high fever because I was delirious in that bunk bed. I remember, to this day, I still get that feeling of being delirious. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, I get that feeling. And I was young, I was 5 years old. You knew not to fight anybody. You had no choice, because if you did, they shot you. As simple as that. My mother had gotten false, non-Jewish papers. She changed her name, she changed her birth date, and ours too. And when we came to Westerbork, my mother even saw her sister and family being dragged in there, and yet she could not acknowledge them because she was not who she's supposed to be, and she had to just make believe she didn't know them. And meanwhile, they were herded off to Auschwitz. Everything my mother did was to save her 2 children. At that point, the head of the camp, his name was Chemeke, called my mother to his office. Of course, she got very nervous, and she went there with us, but we stayed outside. She convinced him that she wasn't Jewish, and this was a mistake that she's there in this Jewish camp, and he released us. We had to have a place to hide. We couldn't just walk around, even though she had these non-Jewish papers. That doesn't mean anything. She's still Jewish. So she found, this particular woman, a friend, found a place for us to be hidden.
They put them in the ghetto. It was like an enclosed area where you couldn't get out of. Just the way the word says ghetto, that's what it gets. No food or nothing. You had to go scrounge for yourself. The Germans were shooting across the bed into the house. My mother and I were laying flat on the bed, and this bullet came right across on it. It just missed us. And then after that, they sent us into concentration camps in the Ukraine. They took me from Mogilev to Jurin. And then from Jurin, they took me back into Chernovitz. At that time, my mother wasn't with me. I don't know where they kept her. They kept her separated, the children from the parents. I don't know how many people were. My cousins were there, the other people in the building. And I told them they can't get in. So they said, why? I said, it's owned by American citizens. And they left because they didn't know what their rights were. The American citizenship saved my life. My cousin Arthur was a lawyer, and he sent a telegram to my father that I was taken and put into the ghetto. My father got in touch with the American embassy, and they took over. They took me out of there.
Right before Shavuos, we had to stay in the middle of the center of the town. Then they took us to the trains. From the trains, they took us to Birkenau. We went to Birkenau. We was there about 3 days and take us to Auschwitz. And then we had with Dr. Mengele, right? He passed by what they called the angel of death. And we all went through him, and he said, like, put on, you go this way, we go this way. So we were 5 children. The smallest, I think, was 2 years old, 2.5. So he went with my mother, and then 2 brothers and a sister. And that was my mother, and they perished there. And Auschwitz is where I got the number. You see the number here? A3309. See, my brother has 3308. If you would have been different, if you had 3309, I had 3310, then we wouldn't have been together anymore. But we've been separated. So we had 38 and I had 9. We're still together. If I would have had 10, we would have been separated. From there, in Auschwitz, you were there a few days, but there was a transition camp. But from there, they sent you other places. From there, I went to a campus called Testing Group. That was a campus, a punishment camp, but we worked in the coal mine. It was a coal mine. It was in Galicia. We worked in the coal mine there until January. I also fast in Kippur. I also fast a half a day. Because you see, the piece of bread what they gave us, I put it in my shirt. I kept it, and I worked with it in the mine. Mine was very low. And you had to work on your knees, but they gave us shoes, unique shoes. Because you had to shovel coal and put it to the wagons, you know what I mean? Because it was very low. After that, we marched. It was a bitter cold weather. My feet got frozen. And finally we came to a place. They took us by train after us opened to this place, Doro. That was a place where I told you, they built the V-1s and V-2s, the rockets that they flew over to England. That, with Doro, there was also a punishment camp. It's like a religion. Every Sunday, we came in from work, it's lined up just to hang people. Every Sunday. I worked in there. Me and my brother worked together at the time, thank God. And then we were shipped out to Bergen-Belsen. They took my father away already in the working to Ukraine. So he went to the Ukraine. And then after the war, I found out that this person that was with him, that my father got sick. And they put a lot of sick people, a lot of sick Jews into a barn. And they put the barn on fire. And all the people burned alive. My father was one of them. And he told me there was about Passover time. So I keep the first day of Passover, I keep the yatzat with my father. So I remember, you know what I mean?
One evening, we were informed that we are going to leave the next morning. They're taking us to a secure place because the Russians are coming closer. They told us to take only 25 pounds per person. 100 people were pushed into this boxcar, and it was very, very crowded, like sardines. And we didn't know where they're taking us and how long it will take. And we were taken to a ghetto called Ghetto Berehovo. Then 2 days later, we were taken again to the train station, and there was a boxcar train waiting for us. They put on 2 containers, one for water and one for human waste. And the doors closed, and the train was moving. It took us 5 days to reach Auschwitz. And there were the SS and Wachmann with ferocious hunting dogs who were yelling in German, raus, raus, out, out, schnell, schnell, fast, fast. And they told us to line up men separately and women with children separately. The guy that's known as Mengele, he was the one who selected the people just with his finger. He said either right or left. When I stood in front of him, he hesitated for a moment what to do with me, because I was short even then. It looked to him probably as a kid, but at the same time I was built well. Or maybe it was Chutavot that saved me, and he sent me to the right with my brother together. There were tables, and on them were uniforms of prisoners, and behind them were standing other prisoners who were throwing at you a pair of uniform. Now they threw at me a very large one. I couldn't wear it because it was falling off. I was lucky that near me there was a big tall fellow, and he got a very short. So we exchanged, and that's how we were able to wear it. We were waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we had to rush to a barrack which was called the washroom. It was a very primitive kind of a washroom. There were only faucets with cold water. Can you imagine that thousands of people were running at the same time? We had 20 minutes to go and wash. Most of the time we didn't get to it. We received 700 calories a day food. Now we did all kinds of work, construction, loading and unloading military equipment, cleaning the camp. We were there for 2 months, my brother and I. And one morning when we were standing at the appel, at the roll call, they told us, above Pnei, and they took 1,000 prisoners because every barrack had 1,000 prisoners. They took 1,000 prisoners to the train station again, and they put us in these wagons. I went through 6 camps: Auschwitz, Plaszow, Gross-Rosen, Balkenheim, Reichenau. One morning, we were told that we are going to be evacuated, and they had orders that if anybody cannot keep up with the march, they should shoot him and throw him to the side of the road. And then we went on that march. We arrived in Buchenwald. Only 400 of us out of 10,000, and I was one of them that survived. 2 weeks before liberation in Buchenwald, a boy from my hometown, from Bilke, his name was Mendy, who was with us in Plaszow together, arrived also in Buchenwald much later. And I saw him walking, and I went over to him and said, Mendy, maybe you know what happened to my brother Yosef. He said, yes, unfortunately, in December of 1944, he was taken to the infirmary because he was very sick. Now, it's a fact that anybody that went into the infirmary, never came out alive. The sirens started to wail, and we saw planes in the air. These were American planes. The SS closed the gates and they ran for cover, and the planes started to bomb all around the camp, not the camp itself, but outside. And suddenly, around noontime, 2 American tanks with soldiers on them and a jeep with a Jewish chaplain. His name was Rabbi Herschel Schechter from Yeshiva University, came into the camp. He came to our barrack and he said in Yiddish, "Jüdische Kinder, ihr seid frei." Jewish children, you are free.
After the liberation, we were liberated by the British. The first week, they kept us in the room because you see, our necks were so shrunk, you know what I mean, that we couldn't eat any solid food, like we couldn't swallow bread and anything like that. So they gave us 5 times a day, they used to give us hot soup. You mean, to loosen up the neck because it was so shrunk. And then you were on your own.
The day that Holland was declared freed, people just ran on the street and were singing, and the flags were out, and planes were overhead, and packages were coming down to us. It was the most wonderful, wonderful day. I'll never forget it. As young as I was, we were dancing and singing, and it was heaven.
We were taken to Écueil. It was a very nice town in the south of France. One night, in the middle of the night, a convoy of British Army trucks arrived, and they took us to a very small port, and there was a freight ship waiting for us. And we sailed for 10 days on the Mediterranean. From a distance, we saw the mountains of the Carmel. We were overjoyed. There was a program, Chipus Krovim, looking for relatives, that Moshe Lifshitz, because that time my name was Lifshitz, Moshe Lifshitz is looking for his brother Shmuel Tzvi Lifshitz. So he ran over to him and told him, "I just heard that your brother Moshe is here in Atlit." He said, "It can be." I recognized him because he was older when he left, and he also sent pictures from Eretz Israel before the war. Then I found out that 3 sisters that were in Auschwitz survived, and and also another brother who also survived, and they met in Austria, and they went to America because we had an uncle, my mother's brother, who was here for many years before, and he sent them papers. So we connected, and over 50 years, I devoted my life to Jewish education.
We arrived in the United States in August 20th of 1941. We went to my uncle. And Uncle gave us chicken soup. I could not eat the chicken soup because I didn't eat meat and chicken for 5 years. My stomach couldn't take it. We came to Williamsburg. I was 9 years old. I needed a yeshiva, and we moved to Williamsburg because it was the yeshiva of Torah Vadas. I was able to walk around in Williamsburg with a yarmulke on her head, which I couldn't do in Germany.
I went back to Chernobyl after the end of the war. No, at the end there was the Russians that were in charge. Not good, but better than having the Germans. Because they were just disliked, like the Jews were disliked by the Germans. So they were in the same boat with us. Well, that was a Secret Service. He tried to make me give up my citizenship, and I wouldn't do it. So after a while, he nudged me so much. I said, so if you were in my shoes, would you do that? So that was the end of the story. When we came back from Chernovitz, my mother got a job and went to work, and I stayed home. She was taking care of a sick lady. When I left Chernovitz, I went to the embassy and to Bucharest. They were waiting for transport. They could go across the ocean. I almost got kidnapped. Whatever country it was in, they tried to grab me, keep me there. The people on the boat saved me. The trip took 6 weeks. I landed in Baltimore. My father, my great uncle, and my cousin were waiting for me. I went to New York first with my father, and then I went to, my father took me to cousins in Jersey, and I stayed there until I got married. Where did I work? For Lily Dashay in New York, doing hat design. I worked for them for a while. I designed hats. I opened my shop in Bayonne, New Jersey.
They took kids under 16, they took to England. Well, we were in a hostel there, boys and girls together, I mean. We didn't work, of course, but they fed us, gave us food and all that, so it was good enough. How did I get to America? My grandfather was still alive. And after the war, people came over, with the newspapers and things like that, They came over, they asked questions, I told them, I've got relatives here. But I remember the streets where they lived. I didn't remember the address, because I don't remember the street, the Moore Street. And I told them, so one of those correspondents, they put in the newspapers. But my grandfather found out and then sent us papers over there. And, we landed in Canada, but they came overnight, they came with the train over from landed in Quebec, Canada, but came overnight, they came with the train to New York. Well, I had, my uncle was waiting, my grandfather just passed away before that. My uncle was waiting. Yeah, I was married. I was married for 50 years. Yeah, I have a son and a daughter.
When we came back to Paris, we lived on clothing given to us by the Red Cross, which means they were not new. And I had a lot of help from what was called the Joint, the organization that helped the Jews financially and otherwise. I came to America in 1954, which was about 9 years after the war ended. Oh, I did get married in Paris. I found a husband here, but I got married in Paris. So one of my sister's grandchildren got married in Switzerland. And all my siblings and myself and some of the nephew and nieces decided to go back to the place where we had crossed into Switzerland and make a brocha there. The brocha being, she'osoli neis b'mokom hazeh. Okay, I came to the United States. I knew French and English, and I worked at the United Nations. We have 7 children, Baruch Hashem. Look at the nachas that you now have. Who would have believed in the war years the enormous amount of revival of Torah, the nachas that you have when you look at all the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who are all, Baruch Hashem, Yirei Shomayim.
We came to America with nothing. My mother had a brother, and she was one of 6 siblings. Everybody was gone. And the only one left was in America, one brother. And he was able to get us to America with all the papers, the affidavits. We had to go to Sweden, from Holland to Sweden, and from there we came to America. It was a freighter, nothing fancy. My brother and my mother got very seasick. I only lasted 1 day of seasick, and the workers taught me my first word of English, which was okay. Washington Heights is where we migrated to when we came to America, where my uncle brought us. Washington Heights was a nice German Jewish neighborhood. And that's when I first learned that I was Jewish. I didn't know until then that I was Jewish. And we were in a nice Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. My brother, who was 4 years older than I am, almost, he became friendly with my future husband a little bit, not much. We lived a half a block away from each other. And somehow or other, I got to know him. At that time, the Jewish children sort of connected. Anyway, I'm here. I'm here with a wonderful family and friends. And we survived. As my brother always said, we beat them. Those were his words.
There are so many stories. There's a story about the man who came to his Rav and says, after the Holocaust, I could never believe in Hashem. And the Rav says, why not? He says, because I saw somebody who had tefillin. And he went around and everybody knew that if you wanted to borrow his tefillin in the camps, you had to give up a quarter of your day's rations. We all know how little food the people got. And there was a line out the barracks of people giving up a quarter of a day's ration. And this guy compared to everybody else, he had a feast. And he was taking advantage of his tefillin in that way. How could I believe in Hashem? And the Rav says to him, why are you focused on the one man who exploited the others? Why not focus on the line of people outside of the barracks, ready to give up a quarter of their day's rations for the opportunity to wear tefillin for a few minutes? Yeshayahu Hanavi tells us, Ki gavhu shamayim me'aretz, just as the heavens is high above the land, King gavhu derachai midarchechem u'machshavosai mimachshavosechem. So too, my ways are above you, and my thoughts are above your thoughts. How can we make sense of the Holocaust? Very simply, we cannot. But what can we do? We could trust Hashem.
The Nazis' purpose to make us numbers instead of names is so that we'd forget our identity and start just dying, and we'll be they wanted the Jews to be extinct, but they didn't just want to kill them, they want to make them lose their identity and feel totally terrible.
10 million Jews, gypsies, everyone went through something this horrible. That's not even, I can't even imagine.
I was praying to God and saying the psalm, Mizmor David Ma'in Yavo Ezri, where can help come for me?
Seeing how he just persisted through the tough times even after everything, it just showed me how hopeful he was and never really take anything for granted.
That the Nisim done for us, that we can see, that we can't see.
From her story, I can take that she had belief and emunah in Hashem the whole time, and I'm able to apply it to my life by saying that I'm able to believe in Hashem every second of my life because I know that He's there.
Really? It's just God's, the way Israel wanted that way.
What I can learn from his story is not to ever lose faith or take anything for granted, because everything will turn out good in the end.
Now I have a lot of nachas, thank God.
You don't always get an opportunity to meet a survivor and be able to ask them all these questions. So if you get the opportunity, you should take it.
My message is very simple, that Jewish youth should get all Jewish education he can.
After hearing her story, I would tell my generation that you should not take anything for granted, because everything is even one little thing is a huge thing.
To be truly ehrliche Yidden, follow the footsteps of our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers.
We should never give up. That even though all this happened to us and against all odds, we should be in the history books. We're still here.
It's not a story, it's the truth. This is the way it goes. We're not liked, and that's all to it.
Never stop believing, always stay brave,
and do whatever you can to stay alive.
People should know, younger generations, like you, then you got younger kids growing up, and should keep up the Holocaust.
You only enjoy something once it's lost. You should just enjoy it while you still have it.
Be very proud of being Jewish. Smack anybody down that talks to you anti-Semitic. Believe me, I would.
I would respond to a Holocaust denier that they should stop trying to hide behind something fake reality, and that they should start just looking at facts.
זהו עושר המשמח בחלקו. A rich person is the one who is happy with his life. And you have taught us that, and it went to our genes, and Baruch Hashem, every one of us has inherited it.
We are Rachel's children, and we carry her name. We are Rachel's children, and we light her flame. We see her strength, her dignity, we know her sacrifice. We are Rachel's children, calling her name. We are Rachel's children, and we bear her pain. We are Rachel's children, may it not be in vain. Buried alone, Bethlehem Road, no peace within her soul. We are Rachel's children, crying her name. Jerusalem to Odessa, from Hebron and throughout the diaspora. She is our soul, she is our heart, a loving matriarch. We are Rachel's children, calling her name. We are Rachel's children, more than 3,000 years. We are Rachel's children, and we share her tears. May we learn, may we return, for days of all we yearn. We are Rachel's children, calling her name. We are Rachel's children, together in prayer. We are Rachel's children, now and forever. Survivors of the ghetto, scars that still remain. We are Rachel's children, crying her name. From Jerusalem to Odessa, from Hebron and throughout diaspora. She is our soul, she is our heart.